Welcome to The Homeless Conservative, a show about principled politics for exhausted citizens. I'm your host, Blake Fisher, and I'm a political junkie so that you don't necessarily have to be. Thank you for spending some of your valuable time with me today. We're going to talk about some boring stuff. I'm sorry, it's in the news, and I felt like I have to talk about it, so we're going to. We're talking about gerrymandering. We're talking about Trump firing the head of the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, which might be the most boring agency that there is at the federal government, and talk about the overall economy going on with the whole firing of the BLS. So let's talk about gerrymandering first. The unfortunate part about this episode is that I'm going to try to explain all this stuff as much as I can so that if you're just listening, it makes sense to you. However, we're dealing with maps, and maps are kind of a visual thing. So you might want to pop onto the YouTube version, or if you're on Spotify, there's a video version as well. You can just pop up, and every once in a while on the screen, I'll be showing like a map or something. Because we're talking about gerrymandering. So if you haven't heard, Texas is doing a bit of an unusual redistricting in the middle of, normally we only do these redistricts after the census. So we've got a census every 10 years. The last one was in 2020. And then in 2021, all the states will redraw their maps based on the new census information they have. Some states lost seats, like California, for example, and Illinois, I think in 2020, both lost seats. Texas gained some seats. Florida gained some seats. So we redistrict, we reapportion the seats, and then within those states, we allow them to draw those maps. As you can probably imagine, if Republicans control the state legislature who draw those maps, well, they're going to draw the maps in favor of Republicans, and Democrats are going to do the same thing. And this just has been happening for my entire life and longer, is that people complain about those parties being partisan and drawing the maps in a way that's advantageous to their party, and so that they can win more seats. And this has led to, there are only like 9 truly competitive seats in all of Congress now. Most of them are solidly red or solidly blue, and they're getting more red and more blue as we do these kind of primaries where no one shows up and you get the most fringy sort of candidate. And then that person wins because people go, I'd rather have a Republican in there, even if they're crazy, than a Democrat. And so we just keep doing this thing over and over again. But this one, the media and Democrats are freaking out about this, absolutely freaking out about this. And to be fair, Texas is doing something that's very unusual, redrawing district lines in the middle of this thing. Now, Texas is claiming that they need to do this because the census data was wrong. And they're not totally wrong about that. The census did undercount in places like Texas and Texas and Florida. And so Texas does have some legitimate complaint there, because the census, I don't know if you remember what else happened in 2020. We had a worldwide pandemic, which made doing the census very hard. And so the census data census has revised some of that data. And so Texas is partially saying, well, look, we should have more representation than we even have, and yet we don't. And so we're going to try to do this in favor of Republicans. Now, the truth is, it's just a power grab. This is just because Republicans have a very slim majority in the House. Donald Trump would like to keep that in 2026, and Republicans in general. And so, look, Texas is the easiest place to do that. You've got a solidly red state. You've got a completely controlled House and Senate there, a legislature based, that's all GOP based. You got a Republican governor. And so you can go to somewhere like Texas and you can pick up 5 seats by redrawing the maps. Democrats are up in arms about this, and they're saying, oh, well, we're going to have to fight fire with fire. But even the New York Times has to admit that they don't really have much to do, because guess what? Democrats have already jerry-rigged their entire things to benefit Democrats. There's not really much more you can do the redrawing of these ridiculous districts, because they've already done that in states like California and Illinois and Massachusetts. And so it's one of these things that you're hearing about, and most people, based on the media being very far left as far as covering these kind of things, the media and most people would believe that that Democrats only gerrymander in response to Republicans gerrymandering. But I think that's an insane notion, because the actual term gerrymander comes from the state of Massachusetts. There was a governor, he signed this map that had this crazy district that looked like a salamander. And so they started calling it, first of all, his last name was Gary. It was pronounced not Jerry, Gary. So this is sort of a GIF situation, but started calling it gerrymandering, because it's like literally you just draw this line to do whatever benefits you guys. So that was Democrats, first of all. And Democrats have continued to do this. And they've done it to a degree where it's quite ridiculous. So California, for example, has 52 seats now, and 43 of them are controlled by Democrats, 9 by Republicans. However, 58% is how many people voted for the Democrat in the 2024 race. Or actually not the Democrat, but if you look at the congressional races. So, it's more like 60-40 representation as far as Democrats versus Republicans, but 43-9, I mean, that's like way more than 60-40. So that's a good example of a state where, yes, it's solidly blue, but we would expect there to be a few more seats if this was truly representative of the way the whole of the people of California vote. Illinois is similar. It's 14-3 Democrats in the U.S. House, though only 52% of the vote went to the Democrats in the 2024 election. So it's even closer to 50-50. You're talking that's like 53-47, and yet it's 14-3, which would be like 80-something%. So that's a couple of Massachusetts similar. It's like 15-200 in their state legislature, and yet 15% Republican representative in a state that voted 36% for Trump in 2024. So they only have 15% representation. 36% of the state voted for Trump. Now, here's the thing about those numbers. You can't always trust these sort of, 40% of the state voted Republican, and yet none of their representatives are Republican, because you could draw the maps in perfect little squares. You could just literally divide a state perfectly evenly. And if Democrats or Republicans were evenly distributed throughout those squares, you could still end up with solidly Democratic representation or solidly Republican, because if every little square was 60-40 split, you would still end up with that kind of thing. So you can't even look at the percentages. But I'm just saying, those are 3 examples of blue states that are very blue states, but they have even less Republican representatives than they actually would if they fairly district stuff, because they're trying to juice the House of Representatives in Congress. And so California's already done this. Gavin Newsom, in response to the Texas thing, is saying, well, you know what we should do is we should gerrymander our state further. But the problem is the voters voted for something where an independent commission would do it. And so Newsom is trying to say now, actually, let's kick that can down the road. We'll still give the voters what they want, but let's redistrict ourselves for 2026, 2028, 2030. He's allegedly going to take this to some sort of vote to the public in November if Texas continues with their gerrymandering thing that they're doing right now. So Gavin Newsom is even saying, well, the solution of independent solutions or independent commissions and things, that would be great and all, except that we've got to further gerrymander California to combat with Texas first, and then we'll do the fair thing. It's kind of crazy. And just to look at some of these maps, because I think it's worth looking at these maps. This is Illinois. So this was the old map before 2020, and then the new map. And if you are looking at this, the yellow means that those districts were competitive. They were within this, in the presidential race at least, they were within 5 points. So that's swingy kind of thing. And if the darker red they are, the more Republican controlled they are, or more solidly Republican voted for Trump, and the solid blue would be voted for Harris. And if you notice, the map on the left has a couple of really solid dark blue and one solid dark red thing. And what you ended up with is, when they changed the map, you've got several really dark blue, no more competitive ones. Everything is either light blue, dark blue, or a little more competitive for Republicans. And so that's how you end up with a 14-3 advantage in Congress like this. And look at this. This is where the ridiculous thing. And if you're not watching this, I'll try to describe it. There is a district. Let's see, this is district, I can't remember which one it is. Oh, the 13th district. It goes from the lower west coast of Illinois. So this is East St. Louis. This is actually just right on the edge of the Mississippi River. And it goes almost all the way across in a little narrow thing to the east coast of Illinois. There's no reason you draw a congressional district like that unless you're trying to advantage a party. There's no way that makes any sense for this thing to go hundreds of miles. It's like 90-something miles long. It goes almost coast to coast. And there are ones that go coast to coast, like the entirety of... But like when you see these little slivers going through a map, that's gerrymandering, okay? Anytime you see weird shapes that are kind of going around little weird... That's because what Democrats are trying to do generally is they are trying to say, okay, what we want to do is we want to get a little bit of the urban areas, because generally urban areas are better for Democrats and rural is better for Republicans. So Democrats want to take an urban area and split it into as many districts as possible, and then sort of reach out into the rural areas enough so that you get people, but not enough where the Republicans can outweigh the votes of the Democrats in the urban areas. And Republicans want to do the opposite of that. They want to try to combine the urban areas into one district as much as possible. So they try to get all the Democrats in one little district. So it's like, because basically every state has, most states have some sort of urban area that's going to generally lean blue. And so Republicans, if they're like, well, Texas can't have no Democratic seats. They've got Austin, they've got San Antonio, they've got Houston, they've got these areas of urban, where you're going to have Democrats voting. So what they try to do is combine them into one group as much as possible. So you see Democrats splitting urban areas. You see Republicans combining urban areas. So the new Texas map, for example, has a district that runs from parts of San Antonio to parts of Austin. And then there's this little string in between the two of those. Those are an hour drive apart from each other, which is kind of crazy when you're talking about urban districts. There's no situation where you could be able to drive an hour through an urban district that might include like where Democrats would win. That you are, again, a little bitty thin line, probably gerrymandering. So that's how this has happened. It's always been going on. People have been complaining about this my entire life. And yet I don't see a lot of great solutions. So anyway, Texas Democrats flew the coop, and they're trying to basically, if all the Democrats leave the state, the state police can't arrest them, because that's what you can do that. You can be in contempt or whatever of Congress, not Congress, but like the state legislature. So they fled the state so that there can't be a quorum, so that they can't make the vote for this kind of stuff. And I guess the FBI is now going to search for the representatives. I'm sure the FBI doesn't have anything better to do than search for Texas Democrats. So that's what's going on in Texas, and Democrats are complaining about it. And I understand why they're complaining about it. It's just that I would like to see some more outrage when Democrats do this, but you don't hear about it when Democrats do it because it's just normal. This is something that's been Democrats and Republicans are doing all the time. Now, I totally get the point that Texas is doing something very strange here, and that they're doing it in 2025. They're not doing it after a census. They do have some valid points about the census data being somewhat wrong. At the same time, Donald Trump is trying to say, hey, we're not going to count anyone but citizens in the census, which, as far as I can tell, he does not have the power to do. I think it's unconstitutional. I think only Congress can do that. By the way, if you didn't count people that weren't citizens, California, Texas, and Florida would all lose representation. So red states would lose representation too, by the way, because that's sort of Donald Trump's way to gerrymander stuff, because the census, we give seats based on the full population, whether they're citizens or not. So you end up in California, places that have a high number of illegal immigrants, California, Florida, sometimes Texas. You end up with more seats in the House, but you don't have to actually get votes for those seats because those illegal immigrants cannot vote. So you end up with more representation, even though you might not have more voters. It's kind of a weird thing. So that could be a problem we solve. I don't think Donald Trump's solutions is the right one. As per the usual, I might be with him on the idea, but the execution's bad. So, so that's Illinois' map. Massachusetts map, just in case you want to see that, solidly blue. And they made it even more solidly blue after the 2020 census. California's map's a little bit weird. You see more yellow in the new map, and that's because they did have a redistricting commission do it instead of the state legislature. But again, they're trying to go back on this now and say, actually, we don't want that redistricting commission to do it because we want to redistrict it so that we can get Democratic advantage in a state that has a 43-9 already advantage. So, but you don't see any more red areas here. Essentially, the red areas are less thing, but you do have one more competitive thing. But the problem is that competitive part in California, even with this independent commission, it used to be more like a +5 Republican area, and now it's competitive. So it's within 5 points. So while it looks like, oh, this is more fair, there are more competitive places, they're less competitive. They're more competitive, but they're less Republican representatives. So, these are things that matter, but they're not problems we're going to solve, and no one's really coming forward with a lot of solutions. There is an interesting, this is again, sorry, another chart, but I can explain this one a little bit better. Just a pie chart of how House districts are done in every different state. And this is not proportionally by state. This is proportionally by the number of districts. So there are 438 districts, it's not 435 or whatever in the House, and 41% of those seats are GOP controlled state legislatures that draw those districts. 11% of them are Democratic controlled state legislators. So, a little more than half of all the districts in the country are done by legislatures. And the GOP has a real stronghold on most of the state legislatures because Republicans were smart for decades, and they basically put a lot of resources into winning those state legislature races because they realize how important it is for them to be able to draw those redistricting lines. It's important for lots of other reasons. And so Republicans have control of like half the state's legislatures. So then about the other a little less than half is either like courts that decided. Now, sometimes the courts decided because the legislature drew a map and then the courts decided they were not fair. And so they said, no, we're not going to allow that map and we're going to draw our own map. Somewhat independent, although the problem with courts is that, most of those judges are appointed, and that means they are appointed by a partisan. And we're getting worse and worse on that kind of partisan court packing kind of thing, for lack of a better term for it, where you're getting like blatantly partisan judges and courts sometimes in both directions. So I don't know that I necessarily trust the courts to be the people that do this either. And I also don't love the idea of courts doing it because frankly, it's not constitutionally, it's the state's choice to do what they do. I don't think states giving it to courts is a great idea because, again, you're giving it to a small group of unelected people, and not just unelected, but generally can't be fired either very easily, and you can't get rid of them if they're appointed for life and things. So not that every state is like that. Every state's different with their courts. But then you've got 19% of the total districts in the House of the United States, House of Representatives, are independent commissions. So this is what there are several states. Let's see. The independent commissions are 4 states and 82 districts. So it's Arizona, California, Colorado, and Michigan that are doing independent commissions. So those are the only ones. And again, California's trying to say, well, why don't we just not do the independent commission for a few years? So you could say that's a good solution, except that then Democrats will just throw out the independent commission if they don't get the results they like. And and there's one state that has split control. It's Maine, because Maine's one of those weird states like Nebraska. It's got that weird thing where they do it proportionally. So what's the solution to gerrymandering? Because I don't really care to talk about problems and complain about things unless you can offer some sort of solution. And I think there are a couple. I think you could do more independent commissions, although, again, California is just going to try to undo what the independent commission, that's what Gavin Newsom is trying to do right now. So what's the real point? It looks more like in California, they're going like, oh, here's this independent commission, and we have the you think we're being fair, but really, if the independent commission doesn't do what we like as a party, we can override them with a vote of the people. And so I don't know that the independent commission totally solves everything. We've only got 4 states that are doing it. We'll see how those 4 states shake out. The problem is, for the most part, we only get to see this happen every 10 years. So it's a very slow process. Another solution is to do more proportional representation instead of having single seat districts. This is something that some states had in the past. This is something that a lot of other democracies do. I don't know. I don't see it happening because the problem is people are really upset at Congress. It has a really low approval rating, but everyone keeps reelecting their own guy, Democrats and Republicans alike. Basically, the safest thing is incumbency. If you are an incumbent, it's very unlikely that you will get beat. The more likely thing right now is that you will get primaried. That's the only way people are getting kicked out of their seats in Congress, essentially, is they're getting primaried by someone further to their right or further to their left. This is how AOC gets into the House of Representatives. She goes against the number 3 Democrat in the House and beats him in the primary. And then, obviously, it's a very safe Democratic seat. She continues to win. So we're seeing alerts to the left with some members, although some of that squad kind of stuff has not worked out very well. Several of them have lost re-election because they were so bad at their jobs and didn't really represent their districts. You're seeing that on the right, too. That's where you end up with Marjorie Taylor Greenes. That's where you end up with all these sort of MAGA candidates that have primaried more traditional Republicans out of the party. So I don't see a lot of hope in saying, like, it's not just the districts, it's also the way we are voting and the way we are not getting rid of people that we think aren't doing a good job. We're just going, well, they've got the right letter after their name, and so we're going to keep voting for them. But if you did proportional stuff, if you actually said, okay, here's a district and we're going to draw it, and if the state, for example, I mean, this is how this could work. A state could say, what we're going to do is we're going to send, you could do this with the Electoral College, by the way, too, if a state wanted to. We do a winner takes all kind of thing with the Electoral College, which I think has, you could argue for or against it. But one thing I don't like about it is that in a state that's like 51-50, you if it's consistent in all the counties 51-50, you will send all of the votes to one president or the other. And same thing with your House of Representatives. You will end up with, let's just take California, for example, that's 60-40 about split, Democrats and Republicans. If you look at the vote totals of presidential, Senate races, things like that are statewide, you would think that 60% of those seats, but that would take California going, you know what we're going to do is like purposely draw these maps, or we're going to even just say, whatever, we're going to do proportional representation where we're going to send 60% of Democrats and 40% of Republicans in our seats that we have. If we have 52 seats, that's going to, whatever the math is on that, it's going to be like 27, seats instead of 43 that would be Democrats. So that's another thing. You could do proportional thing. But again, a state legislature would have to feel the pressure from people to do that, because right now state legislatures are not going to do that. If they're controlled by Republicans, they're going to do what's good for Republicans. If they're controlled by Democrats, they're going to do what is good for Democrats. It will take people, voters in those states, demanding changes to make these changes. None of these parties are going to do it on their own. It's just not going to happen. We only have 4 states that have independent commissions. California is one of them, and that's why you get so like a 20% of the pie. But that's a huge number of districts, because let's see, Arizona only has 9, Colorado has 8, Michigan has 13. Combined, those do not have as much as California's 52. So California's the only one, and they're talking about kicking it out. So it doesn't seem like independent commissions are going to be the solution. So people have to demand this. Now, I have another solution that would work, I think, very well. A lot of the problems with Congress, I think, would be solved if you increased the size of the House of Representatives. I think when the country was founded, every representative represented about 30,000 people. I think that was the number, and I might have that wrong. Now it's like 700,000 people per congressional district. We stopped increasing the size of the House of Representatives, I think in the early 1900s, I think was the last time that we did that. So it's been a long time. We just kind of got stuck at the number of seats we have in the House, the 435, is that right? And I should know that off the top of my head. And we just stopped. And we said, or 438, I guess is what it is. And I think we should keep increasing that for a couple of reasons. One, I don't think a single representative can really represent 700,000 people very well. First of all, those 700,000 people are going to be wildly different, especially the way these maps are drawn, where you've got urban and rural. Almost every one of these districts is now part urban, part rural. And so you have a divide there. I think we'd be better off if you had more representation. So let's just say we doubled the House of Representatives, and all of a sudden they're representing 350,000 people instead of 700,000 people. That's still 10 times more than they represented at the beginning of the country. But, that would be more manageable. You could actually do town halls. It would also increase the size of the House so much, you would get naturally less partisan stuff. It wouldn't be so much far right and far left. You would have some more independent people. You'd have more centrist people. You'd have sort of blue dog Democrats that believe in certain things. You'd have more socially, or like less socially conservatives. You'd have more socially liberal conservatives. Like, you would end up with more of a mix of people in Congress. And you would also kind of get rid of the gerrymandering thing, because there'd only be so much you could do if you shrink the number of people that the state legislatures are trying to put into a district. I mean, if you went back to the original, if we went down to 30,000 people and you increased the House of Representatives like 5x or whatever that would have to be, it'd be more than that. People go, well, how are you going to fit them in the building? Look, we can solve that problem. We can make a bigger building. We can have them do a remote. I mean, there's all sorts of ways we can solve that problem. Obviously, the fire marshal at some point would say, yeah, you can't have 5,000 people in this room. We can solve that problem. My point is, I do think it would it would make this better. However, again, we would have to demand that as voters because Congress are the people that do that. And Congress is not interested in giving up its power. The truth is they like being in control of 700,000 people, and because it's less likely that they have to run against someone, and it's less likely that they actually have to face their constituents. Right now, the GOP is completely avoiding doing town halls, basically. They do not want to get yelled at. They do not want to go back to their districts. They do not want to talk to their people that they're actually representing, the people that actually voted to send them to Washington. It's completely broken, the whole system. And I don't think gerrymandering is the reason it's broken. I think that it's not helping things because you have safer and safer districts all the time. And the truth is, this is happening across the board. Again, Republicans, if Republicans have gerrymandered so geniusly, why do they only have a 3-seat majority in the House right now? They should have a much bigger, and same thing with Democrats. It's like, no, everyone's doing this. And that's why it is so evenly split. And that's why you're not seeing these numbers change a lot. I do not believe without a change, you're going to see 40-seat swings in the House anymore. We saw that as recently as 2010. I don't think we're going to see that as much anymore. I don't think we're going to see, I think you're going to see very, very small majorities in the House. And I think it's going to make it even harder to get stuff done. Congress has passed 3 or 4 bills since Donald Trump became president. It's not very many. I don't think they'll do a lot more because it's impossible to govern when you have such a slim majority, because those few people that know that they have all the control can ask for whatever they want and they can say no to whatever they want. And there's no, especially when you're trying to pass stuff in Congress without the other side. Republicans want to pass stuff without any Democrats. Democrats want to pass stuff without any Republicans. There's no bipartisanship anymore. I think you could solve that by increasing the House of Representatives. But again, it's a pipe dream. I don't think it's really going to happen, but it would be a much better solution than trying to fix gerrymandering. Because trying to fix gerrymandering with independent commissions, again, you'd have to get, only 4 states have it. So you've got 46 states that don't. And you'd have to figure out some sort of way to get every one of those states to buy into that when the parties have no interest in giving up that control. So I don't think it's very likely that it's going to happen. By the way, Supreme Court did weigh in on this in 2019, and they said the federal government should not interfere in the way that states do this. The Constitution clearly says that states get to do this. This is a state power. It's not the federal government's job. So this is not something you can solve in Washington. This is not something you can pass some federal law that says you can't gerrymander. It'd be very hard to do. So I think we just need better proportional representation in the House by increasing the size of the House of Representatives. That's what I would do. But don't believe the Democrats when they pretend that they've never gerrymandered or that they've only done so in response to Republicans. We literally named gerrymandering after a Democratic governor, okay? Even though we pronounce it wrong. Okay, let's talk about the next boring thing is Trump firing the head of Bureau of Labor and Statistics. Again, probably the most boring agency there is. I can't think of anything that'd be more boring than Bureau of Labor and Statistics. But I'm glad that there are people out there that love this kind of work because we need this kind of thing. We do need economic data. We do need to know what kind of jobs we're creating. We need to know what sectors they're leaving. We need to know this stuff. And by we, I really mean probably not citizens that pay attention to this as much, but businesses pay attention to this. The Congress and the president should be paying attention to this to know if their policies are working or they're not working or what they need to adjust. We need good data. Trump has no interest in data if it's not good for him, though. He's not really interested in the quality of the data. He's only interested in what it says. And so he decided we've got to fire the head of Bureau of Labor and Statistics. Here's his Truth Social post. It said, in my opinion, today's job numbers were rigged, in all caps, in order to make the Republicans and me look bad, just like when they had 3 great days around the 2024 presidential election, and then those numbers were taken away on November 15th, 2024, right after the election, when the job numbers were massively revised downward, making a correction of over 818,000 jobs. A total scam! That's me pretending to be Donald Trump without doing a Donald Trump impersonation, okay? So that's what he said. He says, these job numbers are scam. They're partisan. They're trying to put their thumb on the scale to make me look bad. And so we're going to fire this person because we can't have these partisan hacks in here. What makes him think the numbers are political? Here's the problem is that the reason he's so upset is because in July, got a addition of 74,000 jobs. These are the initial reports. Sorry, we should pause here for a second and talk about how this works. Bureau of Labor and Statistics, what they do is they send out surveys. They get their data from a few different data points. So they send out surveys that say like hiring, firing, like how many jobs did you add at your company. They also do this via payroll taxes, so they can actually see IRS stuff, how many people are employed, how many people aren't, doing payroll taxes. It's very complicated though, because we have more contractors than ever. We have, a lot of self-employed people, small businesses. It's very hard to get this data. And so much like polling, it's hard to get data. The huge problem for Bureau of Labor and Statistics, I'm just saying BLS from now on because I'm so tired of saying that whole thing, is the survey response rate dropped dramatically. So they were getting something like more than 60% of surveys back before COVID. Post-COVID, they're in the 30s, 40 top response. So they're getting like half the responses. A lot of those come late too. So the BLS does those monthly job reports. So they just released July's job report in the middle of August. And what they say is these are preliminary numbers. And they always say preliminary because they are the first numbers they have right when the month ends. And they haven't gotten a lot of those surveys. They don't have all the data yet. And they continue to manipulate that data based on new information coming in. It's not based on, actually, we want to make the president look bad now, so let's make those numbers go lower or make them go higher. And so what you end up with is revisions. And so in July, what we got is, preliminary reports are showing we added 74,000 jobs in July, which is way under what everyone estimated it would be and what Donald Trump wanted it to be. Oh, and by the way, we're also going to revise May and June's numbers, and we're going to say we overestimated by 200,000 jobs. So you're talking about you took away 200,000 jobs that you said were created in May and June, but we were wrong about that, and we only added 74,000 in July. This happens all the time. This happens every month. That they release this report, they go, here's the preliminary report, and here's our adjustments for the last couple of months based on new surveys coming in and new data. And they sometimes they go up, sometimes they go down. Presidents always brag about when they go up, and they always complain about when they go down, or at least try to spin it when they go down. In Donald Trump's case, he goes, well, they go down, you're lying, therefore you're fired. And he's totally misremembering what actually happened last year. He points to those elections last year, but he forgets that those revisions, first of all, was the same people. So this was the same person at BLS as the same people. And by the way, the other way this works that I really have to mention is that this is a whole crew of data scientists and people that send out surveys, and they compile these numbers, and there's these people that aggregate that. And then they hand those numbers to the head of BLS on Wednesday so that they can give a report to the president on Thursday. There's no time for the head of BLS to change the numbers. Like, this one person at the top cannot fudge the numbers. There would be whistleblowers everywhere going, wait a minute, those aren't the numbers we gave them on Wednesday. The numbers they gave the president are different than the numbers we gave. So replacing the person at the top does not make a difference. The person at the top could not possibly do this. This is not like, in that same truth at the end of it, he complained about Jerome Powell at the Fed. Jerome Powell at the Fed has much more power because it is just a small group of people that control the Fed. It's a board. It's not, hundreds or thousands of people that work at BLS. So it's kind of a silly idea that one person could actually fake these numbers to make the president look good or bad. Okay. So anyway, let's go back to a little bit of how this works. So he was wrong though about how the numbers revised last year. In fact, they actually benefited him, not Democrats. So here is his Truth Social post from August of last year. Massive scandal. The Harris-Biden administration has been caught fraudulently manipulating job statistics to hide the true extent of the economic ruin they have inflicted upon America. New data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that the administration padded the numbers with an extra 818,000 jobs that do not exist and never did. Okay, that was August 21st, 2024. That's the 818,000 job, the revision that they did. And he is right about that. So here's the thing. That happened in August. They revised the yearly numbers. So again, once a year they come in and they go, okay, let's look at March 2024 or 2023 to March 2024. And that is the period of time where they said we actually overestimated by 818,000 jobs. That was a huge blow to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris because they had been bragging about that job growth. And then all of a sudden, BLS comes out and says, actually, now that we have more survey data and we've analyzed this better, we were off by almost 1 million jobs. over that year. And so but again, Donald Trump frames it wrong. He frames it like the Harris and Biden administration lied about it. They didn't lie about it. They took the job numbers that were good and ran with it and I talked about it in a positive way. And then BLS came back and said, actually, we're revising it. 818,000 less jobs. All of a sudden, Democrats don't want to talk about job numbers, and Trump wants to talk about job numbers. And then, but the truth from the other day claims that happened after the election, that like that's when they revised the job numbers and told the truth. It just didn't happen like that at all. And I don't know if he's lying or if he's so out of his mind that he can't remember the thing that he talked. I mean, that was only a few months, that was a year ago. Okay. And I don't know. I don't know which one it is. Either way, Donald Trump wants the numbers to be good, and he calls them fake news if they're anything that's bad for him. And the truth is, things are not going well for him right now. Replacing the person at the top of BLS is not going to make these numbers change because you have to fire everyone underneath it. The real problem, though, is that people need to be able to trust these numbers. Businesses need to be able to trust them generally throughout the economy. I don't think citizens are really checking out the BLS reports on a monthly basis and checking out the revisions. And here's the truth is, they get it right for the most part. Yes, they might be a little off on a month and stuff. Over time, they're generally pretty good. Now, they do have some survey problems. They need to fix some stuff, but we need these kind of numbers. The problem with the economy right now is that there's a lot of uncertainty in the economy. That's because of tariffs. That's because of bad job numbers. There's all sorts of reasons that is. And the really funny thing is that Donald Trump is simultaneously arguing that the Fed should lower interest rates. And anemic job reports would be a good reason to have the Fed lower interest rates. Like that's generally why the Fed lowers an interest rate, is because the economy is doing poorly. Okay. So what they might go is say, if we've got, if we want to juice the economy, if we kind of like boost the economy, you'll lower interest rates sometimes. And the reason you do that is because you try to say, okay, well, we need more jobs and we're trying to encourage more borrowing and more home buying and things like that. Okay. So you do that in times when you have sort of low economic numbers. You might lower the interest rates. When you have booms of jobs, of the economy, of people spending money, that's why the Fed raised interest rates to try to slow inflation. Inflation just is too many dollars chasing too few goods. And that's what we had post-COVID. We didn't have enough goods because we had shut down all the manufacturing. And so all of a sudden there's this like pent up, and we told people they couldn't travel. So all of a sudden there's this pent up demand, and the supply couldn't match it. And so we're trying to even that out by raising interest rates to try to discourage some of that from happening. So if Donald Trump wants lower interest rates, the job report could have been something he could use to say, see, we need to lower interest rates to try to get the job market running a little bit hotter. But he can't get out of his own way. It's like he can't, he takes it as a personal slight. And that's just the wrong way to look at this kind of stuff. And I realize that politicians are going to always be politicians, and they're going to spin bad numbers, and they're going to brag about good numbers. And the truth is, we give the president too much credit and too much blame for economic stuff. Although in this case, I think it's pretty fair to say the job numbers are Donald Trump's fault, because it's entirely Donald Trump that did the tariffs. The reason I think it's unfair most of the time to blame presidents for bad economies or to give them credit for good economies is because the president doesn't control the levers of the economy. Congress does. Congress controls more of that. Obviously, the president has some control over regulations and things like that. The problem that we've gotten into now is this sort of imperial presidency where Donald Trump is the sole person making the decisions on tariffs. There's no one else. Congress is not involved. It's Donald Trump decides there's going to be a 50% tariff on India, and he does an executive order. Now, I hope that the Supreme Court, I think the Supreme Court will probably, if I had to make a guess right now, I hate making political predictions, I think the Supreme Court is going to step in at some point and say, the president does not have the power to create tariffs the way that he's doing right now, because Donald Trump is basing all of his powers on emergency powers that Congress gave him at some point. And by him, I mean this happened in the 70s. He's using laws that were written by Congress in the 70s that were supposed to have these sort of backdoor workarounds where Congress could veto those emergencies. But what happened is that the Supreme Court struck down the legislative veto. They said, you don't have veto power over the executive branch. He has veto power over you. The only veto power you have over the executive branch is you got to get 2/3 of Congress to be a veto-proof majority where the president cannot veto your bill. But that's the only kind of veto power you have. You can't by some sort of legislation, go in and take a vote and say, actually, we're not going to let the president do that thing. Once you give him that power by law, he has that power. So now the president has these emergency powers. The problem is the emergencies that Donald Trump is citing are for the tariffs. He's saying, well, it's because we have a trade deficit. Well, I don't know that the Supreme Court's going to agree that it's an emergency when we've had trade deficits with these countries for decades. I don't think they're going to agree that that's an emergency. Same thing with, he claimed the tariffs on Canada and Mexico were because fentanyl was coming across the border. So he claimed that the fentanyl crisis was the emergency, but then the tariffs were blanket across everything. It has nothing to do with cartel or drug smuggling. It wasn't narrowly targeted at solving the problem of the emergency. So I don't think the Supreme Court's going to come back and just be like, yeah, the president has full power to do this. I think that it's very clear that the Constitution lays out that Congress has the power to levy tariffs. And so anyway, I think that might happen in the future. But for now, that's how we're operating, is that Donald Trump has full control over these tariffs. So he's going to say 50% on India. He's going to say 39% on Switzerland. He's going to say, oh, we negotiated a deal with Japan. It's going to be 15%. And so essentially what you have is an economy that now, like, these tariffs have actually been implemented because they just did this past week. We've been sort of on tariff delay because he kept kicking the can down the road. He said, okay, we're going to put a pause for 90 days so we can negotiate. And then he paused that another 90 days. And what you're going to end up with is now we actually have these tariffs in place. And so you've got a roughly 18% tariff. You just average all of them out versus it was 2.3% a year ago. That is going to affect the economics of the United States. That's going to make prices increase. We haven't really seen huge price increases on most goods, especially goods that someone could stock up on in April and May before these tariffs kicked in. There's a lot of companies that just have gigantic backstocks of all the stuff that they ordered. We saw a huge increase in stuff coming in like March and April, trying to beat these tariffs. And then we've kind of seen, we're seeing less shipments to the United States since then. So as those backstocks disappear, most economists I pay attention to think that this fall we'll actually start seeing more of the normal consumer goods, the everyday stuff across the board stuff. I was at Costco the other day and I heard two people complaining about it. Like, well, this price went up since last month. People are making adjustments on this kind of thing. And for the most part, they're not just, Trump thinks other countries pay tariffs. That's not who pays it. You pay it one way or another, because it's either the producer has to pay it or the consumer has to pay it because the company passes that down to the consumer. Someone's eating that somewhere. And if the company's eating it, that means they probably don't have as much money to hire people. And by the way, all of this is because Donald Trump says we're going to make stuff again. We're going to be a manufacturing powerhouse, which, by the way, we already are. We make more stuff than anyone other than China. We just use fewer people to do it because we're more productive than we were in the 1950s. Shocker. But we've lost 37,000 jobs in manufacturing since May. Okay, so those same job reports that we just came out, of course, that Donald Trump says are fake news, we lost 26,000 jobs in May and June, and then 11,000 in July. And those are preliminary numbers for July, obviously, but the revised ones for May and June. So manufacturing jobs are not increasing because of these tariffs. And so you're losing manufacturing jobs. You've had an anemic jobs report. You're starting to see, like, people are economically, like, worried. You're seeing people not spending money. They're not buying new houses as much. They're not buying cars as much. They are not buying, they're not traveling as much. We've seen most of these things go down. And also people are not traveling to the United States. So places that are reliant on tourism are not seeing the tourism numbers that they have. So it's kind of bad news across the board. And the biggest problem is that it's just economic uncertainty. I think most people, it's not that we are so much worse off than we were a few months ago. It's that people are seeing the economic uncertainty and they're going, I'm probably not going to purchase a new car right now, or I might hold off on that vacation, or, so that's what everyone across the board is doing. And Donald Trump needs, if he wants to be a success, he needs to have some economic certainty, because the stock market does not like uncertainty. Housing market does not like uncertainty. None of these markets like uncertainty. And all he's doing is creating more of that by going, today your tariff is this, tomorrow it's this, I've changed my mind, the Trump always chickens out kind of stuff. It's wild. I saw a chart the other day. I'm not gonna be able to find it right now, but it just showed, like, the tariff rates, like, jumping, like, through the last 6 months, how they've gone up and down and up and down. And there's basically no expectation. A year ago, you could count on, like, an average of 2.3% tariffs. Now, like I said, roughly 18%. You are going to feel that in the near future on everything you purchase if any part of it came from another country. And American-made cars, guess what? A lot of them are manufactured in Canada and Mexico because of the new NAFTA deal that Donald Trump negotiated in his first term that he claimed was the best trade deal ever, and he just went back on it in his second term. So our deals don't mean anything. So why would you sign a trade deal with us if they mean nothing? If Donald Trump himself can sign one and then rip it up in his next administration, or worse yet, a Republican signs this one and a Democrat tears up in his next one, or a Democrat signs one. Like, no one wants to sign trade deals with us. Everyone's trying to figure out how to not rely on us. I mean, they can't, because we are, if you want to export stuff, we are huge consumers. Anyway, numbers are not looking good for Donald Trump, and he needs to turn that around. I don't think he has the wherewithal to do it, though. And so I think it's like, buckle up. I think the silver lining is hopefully the Supreme Court says, hey, you can't do the tariff thing. If that happens, he's just going to go to Congress and try to have Congress give him the power to do it without the emergencies. But the problem, then Congress is on the hook. Congress doesn't want to make any of these decisions. We're in this situation where Congress is supposed to do all this stuff, but they're happy to delegate it to the executive branch, because then people get to praise or be mad at Donald Trump. And Congress just gets to say, well, we just support him. They can throw him under the bus if they want to. I mean, I don't think they will. I think the Republicans are totally spineless when it comes to fighting Donald Trump on anything. But if it came to that, the Supreme Court says the president does not have this power, and Donald Trump goes to Congress and says, give me that power, then Congress is in a pickle, because then they have to vote. They're going to have to go into a midterm in 2026 having voted for a tax increase, because tariffs are tax increases on consumers. It just absolutely is. There's no other way to spin it. It's a tax increase. And the Constitution does not give the president the ability to increase taxes. It gives Congress the ability to increase taxes. And Congress doesn't want that, because they want to be able to raise your taxes without having to vote on it, essentially, is what they want to do. And tariffs are taxes. So look, I don't, if it comes to that, if the Supreme Court actually says, hey, you can't do tariffs, maybe that's the point where we see Congress actually go, no, we're not going to vote to do these tariff things. I think that they'll just happily blame the Supreme Court. And maybe Donald Trump will even see it as an off-ramp. Maybe smart people around him could go, hey, don't think the tariffs are working the way you want to. Like, Scott Bessent is someone that's more reasonable on how trade works, as opposed to like Peter Navarro in the administration. Maybe they can get Donald Trump's ear and say, hey, take this win and just like blame the Supreme Court for taking away your ability to do it. But it really is probably going to work out better if we don't have these. Like, so far, this is not everyone I argue with on the right. I've been doing a lot of guest spots on other people's shows, and the common thread with people that defend Trump all the time is like, tariffs are working. And I go, based on what? And they don't have an answer, because all they do is just hear Trump say that tariffs are working. That's it. Because I'm like, okay, jobs are not increasing. We have not increased manufacturing specifically. Like, where's the win? Like, tell me where they're working. And they will cite, well, we haven't seen the crazy price increases that people were predicting. And they're partially right on that. Although I think that, again, we skewed the markets a little bit by people backstocking stuff as much as they could before the tariffs were implemented. And so I don't think we've really felt that shelf stock shock that we're going to maybe potentially feel in the fall. I think you will have fewer goods. I think you will see the demand stay the same, or go down in some cases. And I think that's the other thing, is that the tariffs have kind of stopped people from the demand has slowed down a little bit for some of that stuff. And so that will keep the prices low. If you lower demand, you will, or increase supply, prices will tend to level out. And I think we just have so many factors. But I think long term, this will not be good for Donald Trump. It will not be good for Republicans. I think that right now, the path we're on, I don't see that there's going to be some crazy economic turnaround. Like I said, if the tariffs continue to be implemented, especially at such high rates, and so I think that it will potentially be bad. But as Donald Trump gets these bad numbers, he's just going to lash out, and he's going to fire the head of BLS and then replace it with some sort of crony that he wants up there. And maybe that won't change a thing about how the numbers are. Maybe the numbers will still be just as accurate, but I think people not trusting those numbers is where we get into a situation where this feels like Venezuela or China or Russia, where someone at the top, some sort of autocrat dictator, says, I don't like those numbers, we got to fudge them. There's a reason we don't trust any numbers that come out of China. And I think once the president starts putting their thumb on the scale of the Fed and starts putting their thumb on the scale of the Bureau of Labor and Statistics or any of these other kind of things, anytime he gets numbers he doesn't like and he calls them fake and then fires those people. By the way, this is also Donald Trump's fault because he fired the advisory board. This is part of the Doge cuts and stuff. Fired the advisory board that helped make sense of the numbers that the BLS got from those surveys. So he fired the people that made the numbers more accurate and then is shocked when the numbers are being revised so wildly. And so this is, again, it's entirely Donald Trump's fault, and he's going to try to blame it on other people. He's going to try to blame it on Democrats. He's going to try to blame it on partisan hacks inside the federal government. He's going to try to blame it on the deep state. But Donald Trump chose to fire her, the head of BLS, and Donald Trump will have to live with that consequence. He can't blame it on someone else. This is not something where people get to go, well, he was listening to the wrong people. No, that was his Truth Social post. He was the one complaining about it. Right before that happened, J.D. Vance was on TV trying to spin the low job numbers as, no, this is a good thing. That means we are kicking out illegal immigrants who were taking those jobs from Americans. That's why the job numbers dropped. It's because those were illegal immigrants that had those jobs. That was literally the spin of the jobs report before Donald Trump said, actually, it's all fake news. It's all partisan stuff, and we're going to fire the person. So I don't see this working out super well for Donald Trump. But these are sort of two nerdy, important things. So that is it for me. Thanks for joining me on today's episode of The Homeless Conservative. If you could do one thing for me, rate the podcast wherever you listen to it. That really helps me out a lot, and I appreciate it. If you can do two things, go check out YouTube. I'm trying to do more short videos about specific topics that you can share with people. That's it for me. I will catch you next time.